My name is Richard Thompson. I am 62 years old, and I worked most of my life as a high school history teacher. I never thought the end of my story with my daughter would unfold in such a cruel way, but the moment she left me stranded in the forest with nothing but my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, I knew something inside me had already broken. You never forget the sound of your child's laughter when they are small, the way their hand clutches yours, the way you promise yourself you would protect them from anything but the sound of that same child turning their back on you and mocking you as if you were disposable. That cuts deeper than any knife. Before we continue the video, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. It started long before the camping trip. Emma, my daughter, is 30 years old now, and she used to be my pride and joy. She was the one who would sit with me on the porch listening to my old stories about history, pretending to be interested in battles and kings even when she was too young to understand. She was the one who used to run into my arms when I got home from school. But life has a cruel way of shifting bonds. I lost my wife to illness 5 years ago, and Emma began drifting away after that. Her grief looked different from mine. She buried herself in a new family, a husband who always looked at me like I was some burden, and in-laws who treated me as if I was invisible. The camping trip was her idea, at least that is what she told me. She said, "Dad, you've been cooped up in the house for too long. You need fresh air. You need to get out and live a little." She insisted we go somewhere wild, somewhere with mountains and trees and quiet nights under the stars. I wanted to believe she cared. I wanted to believe this was her way of bridging the gap that had grown between us. So I said yes, with more excitement than I admitted. We drove up into the forest with supplies loaded in the back. Her husband, Mark, didn't come. He said he was too busy, but I noticed the way Emma avoided my eyes. When I asked about it, we pitched the tent near a clearing with a small river trickling nearby. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. The crackle of the campfire brought back memories of camping with her mother years ago, when Emma was just a child with marshmallows sticking to her fingers and stories spilling out of her mouth as the stars blinked above us. For a moment, I let myself feel hopeful. But the first night, something felt wrong. Emma spent most of the time on her phone, giggling at texts I didn't see. When I tried to tell her a story about her mother, she cut me off, saying, "Dad, you've told me that 100 times already." There was impatience in her tone, not the warmth. I remembered I felt a weight in my chest, but I swallowed it, thinking maybe tomorrow would be better. The second day, we went hiking deeper into the woods. The forest was dense, sunlight dripping through branches in golden shards. The air was cooler, the silence broken only by birds and the crunch of leaves under our boots. After hours of walking, I asked if we should turn back, but Emma said, "No, Dad, I want to show you something." She led me further away from the trail until my legs ached and my breath grew shallow. Finally, we stopped in a clearing. My daughter looked at me with a strange smile. She said, "Dad, do you trust me?" "Of course I do," I answered without hesitation, because that's what fathers are supposed to say. That's when she laughed, not with kindness, but with sharpness. "Meet Grizzly Bear," she said, pointing behind me. I turned around in panic, but there was nothing, just endless trees and shadows. When I looked back, she was walking away briskly. I shouted her name, confusion slicing through me, but she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. She just kept walking until the sound of her steps was swallowed by the forest. At first, I thought she was joking. I waited there in the clearing, thinking she'd jump out from behind a tree or run back laughing. But minutes turned to an hour. The forest grew darker. As evening fell, my water bottle was nearly empty, and I had no idea where the campsite was. My daughter had left me there deliberately. As night closed and I felt fear crawl up my spine, the forest is not silent at night. It is alive with whispers and howls and rustling shadows. Every crack of a twig felt like something watching me. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like footsteps. I thought of Emma, sitting at home safe, perhaps laughing with her husband about how she left the old man in the woods. I felt anger rise, but beneath it there was something worse, an unbearable grief. I raised her. I taught her. I gave her everything after her mother died, and now she had discarded me like trash. I tried to move. I stumbled through the trees, searching for any sign of the path. But the forest is merciless. In the dark, my flashlight flickered and died halfway through the night. So I sat down against a tree, hugging myself against the cold. The air bit at my skin. The dampness seeped into my bones. I listened to the calls of animals unseen in the shadows, and I thought, this is how it ends. My own daughter brought me here, not for bonding, not for healing, but to get rid of me. By morning I was weak, but still alive. Hunger gnawed at me, thirst made my lips crack, I pushed myself up and kept walking, searching for sunlight breaking through the canopy. I thought about Emma with every step. Was she hoping I wouldn't find my way back? Was she waiting for a call from the police telling her I was gone? Did she plan it this way with her husband? Were they both tired of me after miles of wandering? I finally found the river. The sound of water rushing over rocks was like salvation. I drank until my stomach hurt. I washed my face and felt some strength return. Then I sat by the riverbank shaking with rage and heartbreak. Emma had betrayed me in a way I could not comprehend. The forest was no accident. The words she said still echoed in my head. Meet Grizzly Bear. That wasn't a joke. That was cruelty pure and cold. She wanted me gone. And as much as the pain ripped through me in that moment, another thought began to form. If she wanted me gone so badly, maybe she had already made plans. Maybe she and her husband stood to gain from my absence. Maybe there was more to this than just cruelty. I decided then that if I survived this forest, I would not simply return home quietly. I would find out the truth, and I would make her face the consequences. I followed the river downstream, my legs trembling, my throat dry again. Even after drinking the cold water, the forest stretched endlessly around me, every tree a mirror of the last. But the river was my guide. I knew rivers led to towns, or at least to some sign of people. Hours passed, my body aching, but my mind sharper. With every step I thought of Emma's face, the smirk she wore as she walked away. She hadn't hesitated, she hadn't turned back. That image burned into me and turned my grief into something hotter. My daughter wanted me to die out here, and maybe she had already imagined herself delivering some tearful story about how her poor father had wandered off and gotten lost. I clenched my fists and whispered through clenched teeth, "Not yet, Emma, not yet." By evening, I stumbled into a ranger station. It looked almost abandoned, a small wooden cabin with a flag out front and a radio antenna jutting into the sky. Relief nearly knocked me off my feet. A ranger came out, a middle-aged man with weathered skin and sharp eyes. He looked at me like I had crawled out of the earth. I told him I was lost, and he offered water and food. He asked where I had been camping. I explained my daughter had brought me out here, but left me, and I couldn't find my way back. He frowned and said, "You're lucky to be alive, sir. People get lost out here, and they don't always come back." That night I stayed in the ranger's outpost, safe under a real roof, with food warming my stomach. But my mind wasn't at peace. The ranger said he could take me into town the next morning, and I agreed. Yet, as I lay on the small cot, I could not stop thinking about Emma. Did she even call the police? Had she told anyone I was missing? Or was she sitting comfortably at home, with Mark already spinning lies about my disappearance? The next day I was driven into town. I bought a bus ticket back to my city with the little cash I had in my wallet. The ride was long, but every mile gave me more clarity. My daughter didn't just abandon me out of carelessness. She abandoned me with intent. That meant there was something bigger behind it, and I was going to find out. When I walked back into my house, Emma was sitting on the couch with Mark. They froze when they saw me. Her eyes widened, her face drained of color. Mark muttered under his breath, "Holy hell, he's back." I stood in the doorway, dirty, exhausted, but alive, and I said calmly, "Did you miss me?" Emma stammered, "Dad, we thought you got lost. We were going to call someone." I interrupted her. "You left me. You told me to meet Grizzly Bear, and you walked away." She flinched, but Mark cut in, trying to sound confident. He said, "You must have misunderstood. You're old. Maybe you got confused." I glared at him and said, "I may be old, but I am not blind, and I am not senile." I went upstairs without another word, leaving them in silence. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. In my room, I sat on the bed and looked at the photographs on my dresser, pictures of Emma when she was young, smiling, laughing, hugging me tightly. How had that little girl become this cold stranger downstairs? I felt a sharp ache, but I refused to crumble. Instead, I began to plan. Over the next few days, I watched them carefully. Emma and Mark whispered often in the kitchen, sometimes stopping when I entered. They looked nervous around me. Mark made phone calls in hushed tones. Emma avoided my eyes. The truth revealed itself piece by piece. I checked my mail and found documents addressed to me, unopened insurance papers I hadn't signed, bank statements showing withdrawals I didn't make. And then I saw a life insurance policy taken out in my name with Emma listed as the beneficiary. The pieces fell together like shards of glass, cutting into my chest. My own daughter had tried to stage my death. The camping trip was no random cruelty. It was a plan to get rid of me for money, and her husband was in on it. My hands trembled as I held the papers, but my mind grew cold and sharp. They thought I was weak. They thought I was disposable, but they had underestimated me. That night I confronted Emma alone. I sat across from her at the kitchen table. She avoided my gaze, fiddling with her phone. I placed the insurance papers in front of her. She froze, her lips parted. But no words came. I said softly, "Tell me, Emma, was I worth more to you dead than alive?" Her face twisted with panic. "Dad, it's not what you think." I pressed harder. "You left me in the woods. You took out insurance in my name. What do you want me to think?" She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. But there was guilt in her expression, not innocence. Finally, she whispered, "Mark said it was the only way. We have debts, we needed help, and you have no idea what it's like trying to survive now." I leaned back, disgust curling through me. "You would kill your father for money, Emma," she sobbed, covering her face. But I felt no pity. The girl I had raised was gone, replaced by someone I could barely recognize. I stood up and walked away, but inside me a plan began to form. If they wanted to play this game, I would finish it, but on my terms. The next morning I pretended nothing had happened. I greeted them with calmness. I even smiled. Mark looked uneasy, sensing something had shifted. Emma tried to act normal, but her eyes kept darting toward me, as if expecting me to lash out. I didn't. Instead, I started preparing quietly. I went to the bank and froze access to the account I discovered Emma had been dipping into. I met with a lawyer and explained everything about the insurance policy. He listened carefully and promised he would help build a case. I even spoke with the ranger who had saved me, and he agreed to testify about finding me alone, lost, and abandoned in the woods. But I didn't want only legal justice. I wanted them to feel the sting of betrayal as deeply as they had forced me to feel it. So I played along, pretending to trust them again, pretending to be the weak old man they thought I was. Meanwhile, I gathered every piece of evidence, every document, every recording of their whispers, every trace of their plan. They had underestimated the strength of a father who had nothing left to lose. The house grew tense. Emma avoided me more and more. Mark snapped easily over small things. I could feel the walls of their scheme closing, and they knew I was different now. They knew I wasn't the same man who had walked into the forest with hope in his heart. They had woken something colder in me, something patient and merciless, and I was ready to strike when the moment came. I woke up one morning and the air in the house felt different, heavy, almost suffocating. I walked downstairs and found Mark at the table, hunched over a pile of unpaid bills, his face dark with frustration. Emma was standing by the window, chewing her nails. I stood quietly for a moment, watching them both, thinking of how easily they had once decided I was worth more dead than alive. I cleared my throat, and their heads snapped toward me. Mark tried to smile, but his eyes were sharp. Emma muttered, "Good morning, Dad," but her voice was brittle. I said calmly, "I was thinking maybe we should go camping again this weekend." Their faces paled for just a second before they scrambled to recover. Mark forced a laugh, saying, "After what happened last time, maybe not." Emma stayed quiet, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. They thought I was testing them, but I was already far ahead of them. That afternoon, I went into town alone. I bought a small hidden recorder and slipped it into my pocket. When I returned home, I placed it under the couch cushions, where they usually whispered at night. It was only a matter of hours before it paid off. I listened to it later in my room, and my stomach tightened as their voices spilled through. Mark's low growl said, "He knows too much. We should have finished it." Then Emma's shaky voice replied, "I can't do it again. I can't just leave him out there. Mark, snap back. If he talks, we lose everything. You understand everything." His voice was cold like steel. I paused the recorder, my heart hammering, but not with fear. This was exactly what I needed. The next day, I paid a quiet visit to my lawyer and handed him the recording. His eyes widened as he listened, and he nodded slowly. "This is enough to open a case," he said. "But if you want them caught in the act, we might need more." I left his office with a strange calmness washing over me. The trap was setting itself. I only had to be patient. At home, I played my role perfectly. I cooked dinner. I asked Emma about her day. I even offered Mark a drink in the evenings. They relaxed, thinking maybe I had given up, thinking maybe I was too tired to fight back. But I was always watching, always listening. Every slip of the tongue, every strange look, every whispered plan added fuel to the fire burning inside me. One night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, and I realized I didn't just want them punished legally. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. In that forest, the terror, the betrayal, the moment of realizing someone you trusted wanted you gone. I wanted them to taste it too. The perfect opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mark suggested we all go out to the cabin he had rented near the woods for the weekend. He said it would be good for us to get away and clear the air. Emma hesitated, but eventually agreed. I pretended to be reluctant, but then nodded slowly, saying maybe it would be nice. Outwardly, I seemed hesitant, but inside I knew this was where everything would come crashing down. When we arrived at the cabin, the forest stretched endlessly around us, the same forest that had almost become my grave. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the memory of wandering lost came flooding back. I hid my emotions behind a calm face. Emma unpacked nervously while Mark kept glancing at me, as though measuring how easy it would be this time. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, I placed the new recorder I had bought in my jacket pocket and left it running. I needed every word, every sound. Over dinner, Mark finally spoke, his voice steady but heavy with intent. He said, "Robert, you know you're not as strong as you used to be. Accidents happen out here all the time." Emma dropped her fork, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered, "Mark, stop." But he continued pressing forward. "You could fall, get lost again. Maybe this time no one would find you." I set my fork down slowly and looked him dead in the eyes. I said softly, "Yes, accidents do happen, don't they?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Later that night, while they slept, I walked outside into the forest, the moonlight spilling across the trees. I stood there breathing in the cold air and whispered to myself, tomorrow is the day they learn what betrayal feels like. I returned to the cabin and slept lightly, waiting for dawn. The next morning, Mark suggested a hike. He said it so casually, as though it was innocent, but I saw the way his eyes gleamed. Emma tried to protest, but he silenced her with a look. I agreed without hesitation. Inside, I was calm, because this was my stage, and I was in control. We set off down a narrow trail, the woods pressing in around us. Birds called from the trees, the sound almost mocking. With every step deeper into the forest, I could feel their tension rising. Mark was waiting for his moment, and Emma was trembling beside him. Finally, when the trail grew steep and rocky, Mark stepped behind me. I heard him whisper, just push, but Emma's voice cracked. "No, I can't do this, not again." I turned around slowly and faced them both. My voice was low but steady. "I know everything. I know about the insurance. I know about the whispers. I know you wanted me dead." I pulled the recorder from my pocket and held it up. "It has all your voices, every word." Mark froze, his mouth open. Emma gasped, tears filling her eyes. I continued, "You left me to die once, but this time I came prepared." The color drained from Mark's face. He lunged at me, but I stepped back, raising my voice. "The police are already waiting. I sent them the recording this morning. They know exactly where we are right now." Emma collapsed to her knees, sobbing, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't want this, I swear." But her words were drowned by the sound of sirens in the distance. Mark's face twisted with rage as he realized the truth. I had turned their trap into my victory. Within minutes, officers appeared on the trail, weapons drawn. Mark tried to protest, shouting it was a mistake. But the recordings, the documents, the testimony of the ranger, it was all too much. They were handcuffed right there in the forest, the same place they had once tried to make my grave. As they were led away, Emma looked back at me, her face streaked with tears. "Dad, please, forgive me," she cried. But I stood silent, staring at the trees that had once almost swallowed me whole. I felt no joy, only a deep hollow ache. But beneath it, a quiet satisfaction. Justice had come full circle. The forest had given me back my life, and now it had taken theirs. When the police car drove away with Mark and Emma inside, I stood in the clearing and felt the weight of years pressing down on me. But for the first time in a long time, I did not feel small. I felt steady, like the roots of the pines that surrounded me. I walked back toward the cabin, and every step echoed with memories of that first night. They had left me alone with the grizzly bear threat in the air and the silence that almost consumed me. Then I remembered how my daughter had looked at me that night, how she had chosen him over me, and how her voice had been laced with cruelty. When she said, "Meet Grizzly Bear," I thought of that moment as the sound of the sirens faded into the distance, and I whispered into the trees, "I survived, I made it back, and you did not win. This forest will not be my grave. It will be your memory, forever etched in the silence of these woods." I spent the next few hours sitting at the cabin fire, the flame snapping against the wood, as if laughing at the irony of it all. A daughter who turned against her father for greed, a man who tried to bury the one person who had trusted him, a family bond twisted and broken by selfishness, now exposed and shackled like criminals. I replayed Emma's tearful words in my head, "Dad, please forgive me." And for a moment, I felt the sting of what might have been if she had chosen differently, if she had stepped away from him and back to me. Maybe this would have been another ending. But the truth is, once you abandon someone in the middle of the forest, once you choose to trade a life for your own comfort, there is no turning back. Forgiveness cannot grow where betrayal has been watered every day like a weed. I left the cabin the next morning and returned to town. The lawyer greeted me with a quiet nod, saying the evidence was airtight. The recording, the ranger's statement, the threats over dinner, everything painted a picture. The police could not ignore. In the courtroom weeks later, I sat on the wooden bench watching as Mark stood there, with cold eyes, pretending he was the victim, pretending he had not tried to push me into the grave of the forest. Emma sat beside him, trembling, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The judge read the charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and every word landed like the sound of an axe cutting through wood, sharp, final, irreversible. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me. Mark shouted in anger, Emma sobbed in despair, but I did not move. I sat still like the forest itself, unbending, unbroken. Afterward, people asked me if I felt free, if I felt like justice had been served. I told them justice is not freedom. Justice is heavy. It is the weight of knowing the people you loved the most chose to cut you down. It is the reminder that survival sometimes means standing alone with scars so deep no one else can see them. Justice does not erase betrayal, but it makes betrayal visible to the world, and that was enough for me. When I walked out of the courthouse, I breathed in the fresh air and thought about the years I had given to Emma, the laughter of her childhood, the stories I told her by the fire, the times I carried her on my shoulders so she could see the world higher than her small frame allowed me to give her. That love had been real, and no verdict could take that away. She had traded it for greed, but I had lived it, and that was something she could never erase. The forest had been my trial by fire, and I had walked out alive, stronger than they ever imagined. In the months that followed, I sold the cabin and the old truck and bought a smaller home near the lake. I spent my mornings fishing and my evenings writing down the memories that still clawed at me. I wrote about the forest, the cold nights, the betrayal, the sound of branches cracking under footsteps that I knew belonged to people who should have been my protectors. I wrote because writing was the only way to put those ghosts on paper instead of carrying them in my chest. Sometimes late at night, I would hear the wind moving through the trees outside my window, and I would remember Emma's voice whispering in the dark. But instead of fear, I felt only silence. My fear had burned away, replaced with something harder, sharper, resilience. One autumn morning, I returned to the forest alone. I walked the trails slowly, the leaves crunching under my boots. The trees stretched tall around me, their branches swaying gently, as if greeting me like an old friend. I stopped at the exact spot where they had left me, the spot where Emma had laughed and said, "Meet Grizzly Bear." I crouched down, touching the earth, my fingers brushing the damp moss. I whispered again, "I survived, and now the forest belongs to me." I stayed there for hours, listening to the wind, listening to the birds, watching the sunlight stream through the branches, and for the first time, I did not feel like prey. I felt like the keeper of this memory, and that memory was my weapon. Back in town, people whispered about the case. Some pitied me, some admired me, some said they could never forgive their own child if she had done the same. But I said nothing to them. I kept my silence, because words could not explain what it feels like to walk into the dark alone and walk back out alive. Only the forest knew, only the silence understood. In the end, that was enough. As the seasons changed and snow blanketed the ground, I looked back on everything and realized revenge is not always fire. Sometimes it is ice, slow, steady, unyielding. It does not roar, it waits, it watches. And when it comes, it freezes the guilty where they stand. My revenge had been patience. My revenge had been truth. My revenge had been survival. Emma and Mark would spend their years behind cold bars while I walked free under open skies. That was justice. That was poetry. And so when I sit by the lake now and watch the water ripple under the fading light, I feel no hatred, I feel no rage, only a quiet certainty that the past cannot touch me anymore. I am Robert, 62 years old, a man who was left to die in the forest by his own daughter and her husband. But I did not die, I lived, I endured, I brought their darkness into the light, and I won. And when the night falls and the wind rustles through the trees, I smile because the forest is no longer their weapon, it is mine. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to like the video